I am very glad to be here, and I thank for the kind invitation. And this conference is very, very important, I think so, because we can exchange our idea, and this is very, very important. The title of my paper is Dual Anthropology as the Imago Dei. And it is divided in 3 short parts. The first one is the birth of feminism on the ground of Christianity. The second, inside it, the contribution of Edith Stein, her philosophical, psychological, and theological proposal in the field of dual anthropology. Third, what Edith Stein can say to us today in relationship with the gender theory and the queer theory from the philosophical and theological point of view. The Gospel of St. John, chapter 4, recounts the story of Jesus' encounter with a Samaritan woman. We read, "So he came to the city of Samaria, called Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, wearied as he was with his journey, sat down beside the well. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, 'Give me a drink.' For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, 'How is it that you, a Jew, ask me a drink, a woman of Samaria?' For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." This passage reveals certain customs of the day, including that men could not speak in public with female strangers. But why did Jesus not respect this custom? It should also be remarked that he is speaking to a woman who is alone at the well and who is a Samaritan. The Samaritans and the Jews were viewed as conflicted people. With one action, Jesus transgresses 2 prohibitions. And most surprisingly, the woman who knows them still shows herself responsive and open to the dialogue. Does she display what may be typically called female curiosity? Even if this was the case, she nevertheless presents as being open to newness. The dialogue also follows her line of question. The Samaritan woman demonstrates great acuity, reminding Jesus of the need to follow the customs that would have prevented their very conversation. But she also asks him to give her the living water that would have put to an end her hard daily work going to the well and drawing water. Furthermore, she asked Jesus where he could possibly obtain such water, given that he did not have a pail. To this point, one could say that the practical intelligence of the woman is guiding the dialogue. She remains disconcerted when Jesus asks her to go and call her husband. But she does not think to pretend about her husband. Rather, on the contrary, a sort of a confession unfolds when the woman speaks the truth about her marital status. "I have no husband," she declares. Jesus shows that he knows about her situation and responds, "You have spoken correctly, saying, 'I have no husband.' In fact, you have said the truth." The woman loses her self-confidence and replies to Jesus by identifying who he truly is. "Lord, I see that you are a prophet." Realizing to whom she was speaking, the woman seizes the opportunity to ask him an important theological question about the disagreement between Jews and Samaritans. Our fathers worshipped God on this mount, and the Jews say that Jerusalem is the place where one must worship. Jesus answered by pointing out that God must be worshipped in spirit and truth, because God is everywhere. He reveals to the woman, God is spirit, and those that adore him must worship him in spirit and truth. Here we have a private revelation. Like the famous made to Peter, the woman connects the words of Jesus to the figure of the Messiah, ultimately obtaining the full confirmation of Jesus as Messiah. She will tell the revelation to her fellow citizens who will believe her words. They will contravene convention, even they, by respecting the word of a woman. Usually, women's speech and words were seen to be without value. This episode here reveals a background of social discrimination and the legal inferiority of women, but also Jesus' overcoming of this situation. The Gospel of John was studied mostly by priests from the early beginnings of the Christian Church to John Paul II. But the latter was the first to link explicitly and officially the aforementioned gospel narrative to the recognition of women's dignity and their equality to men insofar as both are human beings. In 1988, John Paul II wrote an apostolic letter with its famous beginning, Mulieris dignitatem, the dignity of a woman, to put an end to the discrimination and prejudice against the women in society and in the church. He saw men and the women as equals, challenging not only customs and traditions which were present in the Catholic Church, but also in various secular institutional practices. But this was not the first time that the gospel, and not only the story of the Samaritan woman, but also other accounts of Jesus' relationship with women were read in this way. If we look at how women read the gospel in order to understand Jesus' behavior towards them, we see that the 20th century was very rich and productive in this regard. We also note that at first, the Protestant Reformation, especially Calvinism, saw women in non-traditional terms. We see evidence of this revolution in Protestant thinking in the origin of the nascent United States and first in the Puritan communities of England. Women who could directly read sacred texts without the mediations of the priests took refuge in religion to affirm civil rights within the spirit of Reformation. In particular, Reformed communities in the English Revolution gave to women an ideal of perfection that represented a unique service not connected to sex, in which women could be equal to men, even surpassing men. But not everything was framed within religious practice, though religions provides the possibility of finding strength in the social and political action for women that not only belonged to the higher social classes, but also to those women belonging to the lower classes, which was an unprecedented move. In England, women expressed themselves through petition inspired to John Lilburn's theory of the Levellers, who argued for democracy for religious sects within the sphere of politics. This was in 1642. The demand for the vote by the levelers was accompanied by a similar request by women, and the demand for the vote was also made by the Puritans who settled in the east coast of North America. Similar petitions were made in France during the French Revolution. Men's response was always the same. Women's demands are impractical because women by nature are incapable of engaging the social world. Women, however, were not discouraged, and the movement that originated within the sphere of religion became secularized, ultimately distancing itself from all churches. This is a very important point. The deafness of men would come to determine, in large part, the fate of feminism, which was to become secular movement. But certain women manifested an interest for philosophy, and above all for anthropological themes and questions, thereby turning their reflection and the thinking on the question of the sense of the feminism. Within this philosophical context in Germany, we find Edith Stein. I wish here to explore briefly her theoretical contribution, largely because I find her arguments both profound and convincing. The novelty of Stein's philosophy consists not only in her bringing to light the characteristics of the feminine, especially when she affirms that the woman cannot be grasped without examining the characteristics of the masculine, but also in elaborating what I call a dual anthropology. Her anthropology deploys Husserl's phenomenological method. She was a philosopher. I try to give a short insight in what Edith Stein can say to us. In her study, she first focuses the anatomical differences between men and women, though she does not dwell long on such a difference. She focuses more of her writing on the psychic aspects, the tendencies that differentiate sexes, namely the unidirectionality of the masculine and the completeness of the feminine, which may also be found in the anatomic level and the spiritual level. Male unidirectionality, which is easily visible at the anatomical level, can also be seen in the psychic level as the tendency to focus one specific element to act according one aim, while excluding everything else. Other directions and possibilities become closed off. Stein attributes wholeness and the completeness to the feminine. Here she speaks of a completeness as a movement towards being open to receiving and as a closing what is experienced as an embracing it. She understands the feminine as a kind of a protective embracing, an essential maternal movement. The masculine fixes its attention on one or more aspects while simultaneously excluding others. But we have to mind that according to Edith Stein, each human being in its singularity is both feminine and masculine. Up until now, we have spoken about the difference between men and women from a philosophical and a psychological point of view. But we can go deeper, and we try to understand the value of the feminine connected to the long history of discrimination against women on account of her supposed inferiority. Edith Stein maintains that the difference must be analyzed from a moral point of view. To understand the question of difference, we must broach the idea of the original sin. Her approach is both methodological and theological, in that she focuses the origin of a moral disorder. She comments the origin of man and the woman by exploring relevant passages in the book of Genesis, and was the first scholar to correlate passage 1, 26-29 and 2, 25-27. Later, John Paul II discusses the two passages in his apostolic letter Mulieris Dignitatem. Stein observes that there is a substantial agreement between the two passages insofar as both man and woman are born at the same time. God ascribes them three tasks. They are created as image of God. They create a progeny and dominate the earth. The last task, dominate the earth, is given to both humans. They are both seen to be absolute equals in this regard. I cannot explain all what I have written, but I go to the problem of the sin. What happens then? She argues that the original sin is framed within the context of procreation. She even says that we do not know the mode of procreation prior before the fall. For the knowledge of good and evil promised by the serpent led the two humans to look upon one another with different eyes. And so the sin is not simply to be understood as a disobedience, but what is important is that we are dealing here with the sin of pride, to be like God. And the woman and man accepted this. What can we do then? Redemption, that is Jesus Christ, this is the idea. Redemption given by Jesus Christ introduced into history the possibility of overcoming the opposition of man and woman. If we allow ourselves to be led by grace. This is the message of hope that Stein draws from her reading of the Bible, New Testament in this case, which she hopes to communicate through her own teaching. Her lectures on woman and her pedagogical writings are dedicated to this goal and are still relevant for us today. Stein's treatment of the theological method also contains another precious insight relevant for our understanding of what is currently occurring in Western culture. Her insight is interesting because it revolves around the relationship between nature and essence. She claims that if one wishes to know the structure of a thing, one has to individuate its essence. That is, one must grasp its sense. But an existing reality is a realization of this essence and contains within itself particular variations, and that is nature. And I think this is very important to distinguish these 2 points, essence and the structure and the nature of singular things. If we apply, therefore, going inside to the study of a woman and man, and her his nature and her his vocation, as Stein does, one could say that one finds in woman and man both a variety of variations that coincide with an invariable essence or sense. The difference between the two approaches in no way impedes the possibility of obtain valid insight from both fields of inquiry, that is philosophy and theology. Whether philosophically or theologically considered, the distinction between nature and essence can serve as an interpretative key for grasping key moments of Western culture's view on the question of gender. The non-identification of nature and essence adds something new to the current discussion. For example, various discourses on homosexuality, transsexuality, intersexuality take up the question of the female, male and female binary, and in doing so, do they not need to make the distinction between nature and essence? We can understand better what is the point of view, for example, of gender theory. Then I will discuss, I should like to discuss the queer theory, but I have no time.